Oh, yeah, like an hour, it's fine.
All right, guys. First of all, this is going to be a great class today. It's going to be pretty much nuts and bolts. We got building department here. We also got fire department here. We're going to talk about just what has happened to fire escapes. I brought Rusty along. And this is what these guys step on all the time. And I'll let you in on a little dirty secret. Ready? All you guys have a lot of training, so do they. And they have a great little training program that it says, in case of fire, don't use the
Fire escape. Elevator.
Elevator.
because these things have been under the IBC control for over 100 years. Fire escapes came out roughly in 2016. 1916, you know, and before that, and then, but they really started, dealing with a proper way of putting a fire escape. And then 100 years later, it finally flipped nationwide to IFC. Some states held it still in IBC, and Massachusetts is one of them. Okay, so with that, imagine all of these nationwide in great cities like LA, Chicago, and there's never been any 5-year rule ever for 100 years on these fire escapes. Ever. And unless something was happening in the building and the building inspector personally picked it out and said, hey, I want that thing fixed. This is why these guys don't get on these things. For 100 years they've never been. But right now the IFC, and I'll talk about that in the code, states every 5 years, nationwide. That came out in 2012, 7 years ago. Now, it doesn't mean that you're even applying it yet, because some states haven't applied to 2012 to 2015, right? Because once the state adopts it, then there's another issue of that, maybe your city is going to adopt it. But the 5-year rule, so 100 years ago when this was built, and this fire escape is close by, this actually got this fire escape, believe it or not, in its as-is condition from a school here in Arlington, private school. And you know who told me to fix it? You know who told me to change it up? I'll show pictures of it. Was it the building inspector? Was it the fire guys? Was it the maintenance guy that came in and says, dude, you should change this thing up because the kids use this every day to go to recess. Every day. This came out of the second floor, down to a recess area. And the kids went up and down every day, and you see all the orange on here with all the lead paint. So you got your snack in the afternoon for lead consumption. So this is the exact fire escape. This is a piece. I saved several pieces of it, and I use it whenever I go to teach a class. I try to bring it. Whenever I teach, and I'm involved in cases where firemen or people either are injured or die, and I've been in both. This is what I bring to the courtroom. I talk about the growth of rust. And I say, in order for you to grow, to take a 1/4 inch of steel and leave it alone long enough, every 25 years you're going to grow a 1/4 inch of rust. So by the time you want a 1/4 inch of rust, just leave it alone, don't paint it, don't touch it, don't disturb it in any way. And in these connections, you can grow a 1/4 inch of rust. But if there's more rust in there, then you're looking at 50 years, 75 years, 100 years. What's it look like inside? Look like this. So these are here for you guys to come and touch. So this used to be a 3/8 bolt. If you want to, if you like to write, use this as a quill pen, you can dip this in ink and
It's not so good as a fastener anymore.
and so as you go through here and you look at, a lot of times what hurts these guys is that the head's still there, the nut's still there, there's nothing in the middle, you step on it and that's where it goes. So how do you get it? And what's been the fix? Since 1916, what's been the fix? After 25 to 50 years of these things being out in the weather?
Hold them up.
Roll them up. So don't remove the rust, and I've got examples here. So we're gonna be able to touch this and ask questions. This is a nuts and bolts class. I taught for the very first time this past June in Las Vegas to AIA, the first ever fire escape class. I'm now doing the second ever class in LA when they have the AIA. That's 26,000 members that are architects. And they have no clue what to do here. You might as well ask them how to build church steeples or fix weighted clocks and bells. Because you know who does that? Specialists, and they're either 65 to 85 years old on average. I have a master's degree in reverse stupidity. I've been doing this stuff since 1971. But choice off because my dad hijacked me into it. He's 82 years old today and he still plays with fire escapes and railings and window guards. So I can tell you all the wrong ways to do it. Why? Because we're allowed to use these. And as you guys know, in 2014 in Boston, these killed how many guys? 2. They welded this, and it wasn't even the fire escape that caught on fire, it was the neighbor's shed that caught on fire. And then the winds were 60 miles an hour that day, and as soon as I started opening doors and windows and whatever, you guys know more about it than I do, but basically they were found in the basement. Welding. So why can't you weld things?
You have material to weld.
You have to have material to weld to, but what it is, let me give you a quick lesson so that you'll never let a guy weld fire escapes. Okay? Now, can I weld a fire escape temporarily to hold it until such time that it can be repaired with bolts and with nuts and bolts? The answer is yes. Forget about the lead paint rule, which, are you allowed to burn anything with lead paint on it?
No.
Anything older than 78 is presumed to have lead, and here's all the orange. So lead is not even approved. I mean, welding is not even approved since 2010, but let's pretend we're going backwards. This is 2 pieces of metal. This is my bolt coming between the two. When it heats up in the summer, what's it going to do?
Stand.
When it cools down in the winter, what's it want to do? So that's why when you're building a fire escape in 1916 and even today, you put it together with bolts so you can manufacture and weld things at the shop, railings, weld these things, but then you fasten it together at the site. Every fire escape you're ever going to see is all riveted or bolted. If it's square head bolted, which is what some of these are, squares, they're actual squares, they're about 75 years old. If you see rivets on it, they're over 100 years old. So when it heats up, when it cools down, and as soon as you heat up, what happens to the paint job that you had on there? Cracks, letting in what? Moisture and air, which is what you need to grow what? Rust, which eats what? Steel, what you can see, and it eats what? What you can't see. So this is nuts and bolts. This is my class. Actually, I'm going to be teaching this class in LA. So it's not just a local problem. This is a nationwide problem. But you have the most because everything started here, and you got plenty of salt, plenty of rain, plenty of snow. So we're going to talk about all the things that are hurting people right now. But we're talking about the paint. We're talking about the connections. We're talking about how these fire escapes, if you look at it, you can stick your fingers through. Firemen are stepping on this stuff. They don't even know what they're stepping on, so they're taught not to step on it anymore, correct? Wait for your ladders, use your own fire apparatus, correct? But if I can put on a fire apparatus, now look how simple this is. If you identify, which it's a fire code requirement, that all fire protection equipment must be documented, must have a tag, correct?
Yes. Sprinkler systems.
Fire escapes are a fire protection system, and you never have a tag. How about one of these tags?
What is that?
Right. And this tag is fluorescent. Be seen at night. right? And it has clearly the address, and tells you what the next 5-year cycle is. And in the middle of the night, you guys are showing up, and you see a nice white one, permanently affixed to the fire escape, 7 to 10 feet off the ground or onto the building, and it says what? And there's a baby and a woman at the window. And a simple ladder or going up the fire escape will say, because we know what kills people, right? Is it the fire or the smoke? So if we can act within the first 3 to 5 minutes of anything, and your guys see one of these, I think they need to call anybody and say, hey, should I get on this fire escape if they see one of these on it? So tagging is what they're doing nationwide now. It's starting to tag fire escapes to make sure that the first guys, the first line of defense, feel at least comfortable getting back on these things. Is it going to happen overnight? Nope. For 100 years, you've never had any sort of signal on there that says they work. If they're under repair, but still functional, how about one of these? Restricted use, right? But at least it was made functional, right? Sometimes they don't have the money, sometimes they need a little bit more time, but in all cases, can you do triage in the battlefield and get that fire escape functional? And then truck hits, dangling treads, what do you want on that fire escape? So once you put that on, several people are going to be looking at this, right? Primarily the tenants in the building. They're going to call up their landlord and say, paying rent, and I don't think I can get out my window. I have my child at this school that they leave your building, and I see red. So this is going to help, question. Go ahead.
We have one question. Since we usually have, internationally, we have green, yellow, and red. Why would your Apache red instead of white?
Green?
Just because it's green, so all our ATC trading and all that will show when we do disasters. We have a green that says building, yellow use caution, red almost the same thing. It might be
We take information like that and we use it. So every now and then we're at meetings. So easily, if green is the current code for everybody, building and fire, and the first responders, yes, we'll turn it to green.
green caution.
So we've done that quite a bit. As a matter of fact, even on laying out buildings, you guys love the north, what's north and what's south. So you love an arrow in some of our documentation. And you know what they also want? I think it's fire. You guys want the front of the building is A, B, C, D. We have to modify again. So we're always listening, and because we're responding to different people, but we were told that we don't care. We don't care so much about the ABC. I mean, the north arrow on where this building is located. We care about the A, B, C, D. Where is this fire escape? And it's clockwise, right? So A, B is the left, C is the back, D.
Bravo, Charlie, corner.
Got it? So we'll listen. And if green is the norm, the question is this something that should be done? Because right now, fire escapes are not marked in any way. You can walk down any alley and you have no clue when the last inspection was or not. And tagging is a standard in many cities in the West Coast, but not a standard here. As a matter of fact, the 5-year rule should be also augmented with a 1-year inspection. What's the 5-year rule? 5-year rule is inspected by a design professional or others acceptable to the building official that has a license specific to fire escapes. The 1-year rule is the testing rule. Once a year, somebody goes through the building and has a very short, we'll talk about it, we'll show you an example of it, a very short questionnaire that says, from the roof, over the ladder, down the stairs, activating the cantilever or whatever, it worked, sign, send it in. You don't need to you don't have to pay for a high-end, architect or an engineer to do that inspection. It could be a fire protection company, it could be an ornamental company that does these walkthroughs, and it could be part of your 1 years that you guys do on certain buildings. I need somebody to go through and open all the doors, let's say on getting onto the fire escape, and that will cut down the amount of times that we have damage to a fire escape, which you're not going to see for 5 more years. Because nobody's calling up and saying, hey, a tree fell on my fire escape, and I still have a 3-year certificate. They're like, ice came off the building and crushed something. So we get that all the time. So we're looking for ideas from everybody, but basically building and fire, the people, my very first case ever in the country was a fireman in New York City that fell through the 3 sets of, going up a staircase, fell through 3 sets of treads that gave way. Went back up and saved the woman and the child. By the time he came back down, he had hurt his spine, you know, from the heat of the moment, and basically he was 27 years old. But the key is that they fixed the fire escape. And when we went back there almost 3 years later, those 3 treads were perfect. The rest of the fire escape was in a state of collapse. So we're going to talk about what is a true inspection, okay? And so we'll talk about when the ornamental guys are being guided, they need a design professional to watch them, because the ornamental guys, we call them the welding witch doctors, is this. So let's throw some numbers at you. We'll talk about something that hasn't been touched in 75 to 125 years. Okay? So, you take a 5-story fire escape full of stairs with a cantilever at the bottom attached to the building, and you have to do a full refurb and fully painted following EPA guidelines for lead paint. Okay? And just using what's there. No replacement, you know, just reinforcing everything, a typical 5-story. When they put it out to bid because you wrote a violation, right, in your city or somewhere, you're going to write out a typical violation, and they're going to go in and get 3 bids. Okay? When they get a bid, a lot of times when you used to write the violation in the past, you did it wrong. You said scrape it and paint it. Guess what people did? Scrape and paint. Guess what they got that fire escape scraped and painted for? 3 to 5 grand, 5-story. Right? But while they were there for the scrape and paint, they said, hey, there's some problems up there. Some treads are loose, a rail's full of rust, or whatever the situation. So the owner says, okay, he's got his first bid because you wrote him a violation that said scrape and paint, and that's been the norm for 100 years, since 1916. Scrape it and paint it, because the paint, remember how this thing expands and contracts? Cracks the paint, water gets in. So it was true. So within the first 15 years, yeah, scraping and painting is all you need to do to a new structure. Not 100 years later. So then the second guy comes in and says, oh yeah, I can fix those. I can weld some of those treads back into position. I can weld some of those rails. I'll put a piece of bar, you know, I'll get some 1/2-inch round bar, and I'll stick it where there's a huge rust. I'll just put a bar in here and I'll weld, you know, because you want me to take it out, take it apart, or no, I got no money. Just, okay, so I'll put a bar in here and I'll weld, you know, I'll bridge weld it from here and bring it here and just leave the rest in the middle. But this keeps growing. It does what 1 year later? Anybody ever take a welding class? What happens 1 year later when something keeps growing?
Just pulls apart.
Just cracks the rust. The next day, that rust growth is already microscopically ripping that welded connection apart. So he says, oh, I can do that for $15,000. And by the way, forget that guy that gave me the lead for the paint, I'll paint it too. So I'm going to weld it and paint that 5-story for $15,000. And you wrote a violation that said scrape and paint, right? So now the next thing he's going to do is say, okay, let me get another bid, get 3 bids. And he calls a real ornamental iron worker. And the ornamental iron worker says, yep, I've looked at it, and do you have a report? He goes, no. I said, well, what you need to have a structural engineer or a registered design professional tell me what to do here. So he does. He says, okay, so he hires an ornamental iron, he hires a structural engineer or a registered architect. He goes out and he says, yeah, I've looked at your building, and I found several cement connection problems, I found several rust jacking problems, I found several tread issues, and basically what we're going to do is everywhere that we have rust inside a connection that I can identify in a photograph, I want you to clean it out and put a brand new bolt inside. Everywhere that there's an existing bolt that's still super tight and it's not broken in any way, you can leave it if you wish, but then we're going to load test it. Because what's the purpose of load testing? Your code says it very clearly. The authority having jurisdiction shall accept by load test or other evidence of strength, that's the NFPA, but you're supposed to examine and or test your fire escapes here. So what do you do with 75 to 100-year-old bolts that people want to leave behind because they love them so much and there's no rust inside? Super tight, nice and painted, but as old as Jesus. What's the code say for you to do? Test it, right? So keep some of your bolts. They're good, but any place I find rust, and as an architect or a structural engineer, I want those cleaned out, primed, any worn material replaced, put a brand new bolt, and in there, since we didn't have it 100 years ago, I want you to inject it with 35 to 50-year paintable silicone. For what purpose?
Water rust on
Because these things are made to do what? And what's the first thing that cracks on these things? But if you have flexible, paintable, latex silicone, what happens? You can crack the paint, but you're not going to crack the seal. The seal it gives ever so slightly. So that's the sealant. And that stops this from happening, and that puts another 25 to 50 years on that structure of the fire escape to a building that's already 75 to 125 years old. And what's the likelihood of that thing lasting another 50 years in your city?
pretty good.
Well, since they've invented duct tape and bubble gum and duct tape, right?
Zip ties.
And zip ties. What else?
Big wire ties.
Gorilla glue,
No.
thick paint.
If I could, I know building officials are probably all aware of it, I'm sure fire officials have heard this, and you even started it, but just to be crystal clear, for testing and certification of the building code requirement, all exterior bridges, steel or wooden stairways, fire escapes, and egress balconies shall be examined and or tested and certified for structural adequacy and safety every 5 years by a registered design professional or others qualified and acceptable to the building official. Said professional or others shall then submit an affidavit to the building official. So I just wanted everybody to be clear on where we're starting from, and my main point with that is you're starting there.
Yep.
It's a breath of fresh air for any of these kind of training.
Yeah.
You start where we are.
Yeah. And it's right there, it's a IBC 101.3.
This is actually a Massachusetts amendment, it's a state building.
So what's the actual code number of?
1001.3.2.
Yeah. I have it, there's point 101.3.3, all fire, I mean, we just made it a quick, but it basically says what he just said. All fire escapes shall be examined and tested and certified every 5 years by a design professional or others acceptable, who will then submit an affidavit to the city commission. So, that's the IBC. The NFPA has the 1104. So if you never know where it is on the, they have a 5-year now, it's the IFC 1104. Also have the NFPA, Life Safety Code, if you ever have to reference Life Safety Code. It's 101.7.2, and it says, the authority having jurisdiction, which is the building department, shall approve any fire escape by load test or other evidence of strength. So load tested, or other evidence of strength could be what? Brand new fire escape, or it could be a fully refurbished fire escape. So if you change out all the, if the metal is still good and you change out all the fasteners on this connection, there's no internal rust anywhere, verified by a structural engineer or a registered architect, right? And then the connections into the building have been verified or duplicated. Is that other evidence of strength, or you still want to load test the fire escape?
Well, structural adequacy, the language we have in ours is kind of a blanket to cover all scenarios.
Yeah, it's 100 pounds per square foot, so it actually refers back to the other, to how you build it. You build them to 100 pounds, so you have to certify them. But what happens is, a lot of times, opinion affidavits, and if you look at the Boston one, I think I have a copy of the Boston affidavit, it says, the fire escape has been, is in conformity with the Mass Building Code. And it's very gray and very bland, and what happens is, and they've also let the G3 guys sign off in Boston. And the G3 guys, which I'm a holder of a G3 license, we've let the fox into the hen house. You know what I'm saying? So what happens is now, a lot of fire escapes have been signed off. Not only the same guy fixing it is signing off on it, there's no real oversight going on. So you want all work to be done by an ornamental ironwork under the direction of a structural engineer, generating a report. And the report can be one of two ways. Well, I don't have, the guy that I'm gonna use doesn't read plans, right? The guy that I'm using doesn't speak very good English, or whatever the situation may be. All the structural engineer and the registered architect have to do is go and finger paint it. So they can literally walk on a fire escape, mark all the repairs yellow, all the emergency repairs red, and mark all the cement repairs white. How simple can we make it? And then they have to have at least 3 visits. An initial visit when the team gets started, a surprise visit in the middle, because you guys don't have time to go look at these things, right? And then a final. And in order to get this back under control in the city of Boston and in the state of Massachusetts, I think one of the things that should happen is that any affidavit that shows up at your desk should be with a final, with meeting the engineer on site as a final sign-off. That's what we recommend, because in the next 3 to 5 years, you'll scare away enough welding witch doctors to then let it get back so that you can comfortably receive affidavits from structural engineers or registered architects and feel comfortable that it's a good piece of paper. All right? So let's open it up to some questions, because what I want to do is I want to make sure that you guys understand, because I can go into, you know, slides and we can talk about, but I think you guys need to know a little bit more about the nuts and bolts as to what have they been doing, what have they been getting away with. And when you bring Rusty here, you want me to tell you all the cheats and all? I know them all. You don't. I'll give you a great example that I can't show here, but you ever seen the chain on the back of a cantilever? You know why that's there? Because the weight box is full of junk and it's rotting and it's got extra weight. And you know what happens when you get a seesaw and you put a fat kid on one end?
Hey.
Hey. I know, guys, doesn't it? So, the cantilever is going to do what? Is it going to stay horizontal or is it going to point to the sky?
Point to the sky.
As soon as it points to the sky, guess who's going to write a violation on it?
The projectile that went up.
Because it'll actually touch the upper floor. And you're going to walk by, the owners are going to walk by, tenants are going to walk by, they go, that doesn't look right. And so they call a guy and they say, hey, come on out, I need you to balance this cantilever. And the guy says, oh, I can do that for about $3,000. I can balance that cantilever. Not the rest of the farce. Or for $300, I can go to Home Depot, buy a chain, chain the back, weld the chain to the back, tie it up, pick a piece of grating or some non-structural place where, you know, as it goes up and down, it can yank and destroy structure, because that's like a big hammer, you know what I'm saying? But I'll get it horizontal, and guess what you're not gonna get? Violation. But now it's counterbalanced backwards, because it'll keep getting fatter and fatter and fatter. And that's one of the things we'll cover, because what happens when you weigh 150 pounds on a cantilever that's balanced backwards, you might have to step out 3 to 5, 6, 7 treads, right? And then it'll activate and go down, and then go back up by itself, right? But what happens if you're a 35-pound child?
You all else.
You're gonna be near the end, and then take a ride down.
And then it will go down, and then eject you. And when you get there, what are you supposed to have on these fire escapes? They're supposed to have release mechanisms. They're supposed to be a released, balanced cantilever. So that when you get upstairs and you come to it, single action requiring no special knowledge, you run into this bar that rotates, releases the cantilever that drops 2 to 3 feet per second and hits the ground and stays down. You self-evacuate. 1 minute, 2 hours later, it doesn't matter what time you guys arrive, what do you guys use? Besides their ladders and their apparatus, if they have to go up the fire escape, it's already in a down position. They don't have to get the pole and do what? Pull it down and then put what do you got? What they got to put? They got to put a guy on it, put his foot on it. Well, everybody's going up, but everybody's going down, because if he takes his foot off, what happens? So he's just lost one of his guys to be sitting there as a cantilever holder. Yet those things are supposed to activate, you're supposed to self-evacuate out of a building. I'm egressing out so that these guys can ingress. And a lot of times when all hell breaks loose, guess what the last thing that these guys use to get out of a building? Not including any emergency training, not including your fire drills at your schools, which is mandatory. How many mandatory fire drills you guys supposed to have? Right? And guess what they're supposed to use? The closest egress, which sometimes is, and they're told not, they never use the fire escape for training. Little kids, ever. Very rare. So this is a national crisis, but it's 100 years in the making. We're not going to fix it today. It'll take 3 to 5 years, and it starts with a checklist. Just add it to your checklist. And it says, where's my affidavit? So what Boston do? Boston, many years ago, added to close a permit, they said, I need a fire escape affidavit on that. But if you read the code, guys, why don't you guys open the book and go to this page. You may not know this code, but this may affect permit process for you guys. All right, and again, I'm gonna, after I say this, I wanna ask a bunch of questions and then get back into it again, but Rusty likes to have his questions answered. Check out OSHA. Some of you don't realize that the IFC is working on fire escapes, the IBC is working on fire escapes, NFPA has been working on fire escapes and had this code since 1926. The authority having jurisdiction shall accept by load test or other evidence of strength. Okay? Now let's take a look at OSHA. OSHA is pretty simple. 1910.137. Exit routes must be maintained during construction, repairs, alterations, or provide alternative egress with equivalent level of safety. So let's say you make that. Let's say somebody's gutting a building. It's a 5-story building, there's no occupancy in it. Guess what they're supposed to have for the workers, the demo guys, and everybody in there, including the firemen who may arrive when the fire inadvertently starts. So they have an internal stair, they have a fire escape on the back. So what's the fire escape? The first thing you fix or the last? First. That's right there, right? But it's 100 grand, it's 200 grand. We may be switching it out, we may be doing something different. Do you want to slow down progress? You want to slow down permits? Nobody wants to do that, right? So what does it say? Equivalent means of egress. So can I put up construction scaffolding and satisfy the fire and the building department for the next 6 months to a year, while they figure out whether that fire escape is staying outside or whether it's coming inside? Is that what that says for OSHA? Have I met and kept the safety of all the workers doing demo and all the firemen in case they have to show up for some reason? Now let's say it's an occupied building, 5 stories, but 2 stories are still occupied because they're only demoing 3. Regular scaffolding or egress scaffolding gotta go up. Maintain your level of egress. So what's that mean? It's gonna be the 3-foot wide, 7-Eleven, rise and run, main stairs. You see this all the time. What do you do with the fire escape? You mothball it. What do you do for these guys? You put big signs on it that say don't use it. What do you do to all the egresses that go out to the fire escape? You block them with wood, right? Or no way of getting out on it. Clearly defined that these guys get that they're not going to use that. You use scaffolding to get back in the building. And a year later, what's the last thing you fix? Fire escape.
So,
Yes.
question, you got OSHA, you got 1910, that's the industry standard. 1926 is the construction standard.
Well, so this is the code. When you look at this, this is how it reads. I went to a class that they were teaching down in Baltimore, and they were teaching this because OSHA is now getting heavy on making the construction industry on new constructions has had very few deaths. The reconstruction industry, the restoration industry has had thousands of deaths, people falling off the
I'm
building.
just saying, this isn't the construction standard, this one is the industry standard, this is a different.
Well, I'm just using that as an example so that you have another piece to follow to say, hey, if you want to dealing with your permit process, if you want them to meet the standard in that is you need to have 2 means of egress at all times. A lot of these guys who work on their buildings are issued permits right away, and they only have 1 means of egress inside their building. We're trying to say, fire escapes shouldn't be at the end of the project, fire escapes should be at the beginning of the project.
But you gotta also keep in mind that fire escapes can't happen on new buildings.
Correct.
Fire escapes can only happen on existing buildings, only when complete required means of egress can't be achieved. Property, you don't have enough property outside the building or whatever the case. So a true fire escape in code terms is, if it's ever gonna happen as a new fire escape, it's gonna be a real rare instance.
Correct.
Because it's gonna be on an existing building with some cited condition of, hey, I walked into this building today and this thing should have 2 means of egress, it's unsafe. I say it needs a second means of egress. Oh, they don't have enough room to put a legitimate second means of egress, they're gonna have to fall for a fire escape. So that's gonna be, I don't know, have any of you made that call
Yeah.
recently?
So it's that, the statement that he's made is correct. No new fire escapes. You guys have all heard that, right? No new fire escapes on new construction. You dig a hole in the ground, you are not putting a fire escape on that new building. It's gonna have, aside from most likely an elevator, it's gonna have 2 means of egress, equidistant from polar opposite of the situation. That's just designed in. Nobody's building new fire escapes. But I have a church that I'm turning into 6 condos. I have a factory that has a middle staircase and an east wing and a west wing. And I'm turning it into condos. Guess what's gonna be addressed? First of all, like you said, depending on the level of construction activity going on, and I think if you achieve over 75%, is that correct? All of a sudden it triggers all kinds of code compliance of which, whether or not you have to fit that staircase inside the building. And whatever's outside gets yanked out. So every year, we're losing more and more fire escapes out there.
Well, there also could be an existing building evaluation that could come up as, well, we don't have the second means, but we've got this existing fire escape. Could it be accepted as a compliance alternative to the roof access? So there's
Yeah, horse trading.
places for that.
We're talking about horse trading. So can you horse trade so that we can make that factory stay? Otherwise, you're gonna be knocking down a lot of buildings that there's just no answer to it other than a fire escape system. And fire escapes are, you know, there's 2 types of fire escapes, 24 inches wide, 8 and 8 rise and run, exposed to the weather. There's 36-inch wide fire escapes, 7 and 11 rise and run. Some of them are need a covering. So it's, again, it's horse trading with the building official. Well, what are you doing? You're basically saying, if I'm gonna save this church, I'm gonna save this factory, we need a fire escape on this wing over here. And that's just it. You may not need one on the other side because it has 2 internal staircases. Great. But there will be some horse trading that goes on to that side. And that happens quite often, believe it or not, in your more dense cities where people don't have room. And there's even a call, and this sometimes has happened. You may have some certain situation where a stair doesn't fit in between a certain building, and they've allowed you to put in a ladder with special approval because there's just no room for a staircase. And the only thing which is, you're not allowed ladders. But then all of a sudden, you know, under special conditions, and it has to be approved, a ladder is allowed because they just no way to meet the requirement. Okay? So, and this gets crazier. I'm currently on a case in LA where a fire escape was next to a power line and the guy got electrocuted. The guy's suing for $50 million. The city of LA. I was brought in to see if the fire escape had in any way, did they do something wrong on the fire escape? The pole was too close or not. There's rules for poles. That's still going on. So, believe it or not, 75% of the time, everything that we're talking about today applies. 25% of the time, there's going to be some horse trading. And in some cases, you might have to go to the state to ask for a little bit of guidance, you know, what has been the norm here and there. Okay, so let's open up to some questions. So before I continue going on in my conversation, either for Rusty, or Rust, or Bolts. Anybody have questions?
Yeah, there are 2 types of fire escape. How is that defined? Where would you find that information? The code doesn't define it. They tell you what a fire escape consists of. There's not a definition, I'm aware of it.
There's an egress chapter, and then there's a fire escape chapter. On the fire escape chapter, if you're building a fire escape, a lot of times a fire escape in the past has been, I have a 2.5-story building, I only have that one room up on the attic, and I need to get somebody, that's been the norm. So they would want a platform outside that window, or now they would want a door. And they would want you to come down the stairs with 24-inch, and they actually, the smallest is 22 inches, not 24, but the average is 24. The rise and run is 8 and 8 coming all the way down to the ground. So that would meet that, that's just so somebody can activate a room in the attic. Because they had 2 means of egress on the second floor and 2 means of egress on the first floor. So that's when a fire escape comes into play. Some people take this 2.5-story behemoth home and they make 3 condos. Now, the building officials get into play. I want an egress there. Now they want a full door at the very top. They want it 3 feet wide, 7-11 rise and run. And in some cases, depending on each city acts a little bit different, they want a cover over it. Some don't. And sometimes there's even an issue on the footing because you got grading. And sometimes they even want, in the middle of it, they want for snow issues and women's high heels, they want a diamond plate. So that's why sometimes they want to cover over it so that the diamond plate doesn't accumulate stuff. Any correction to that? Or it's again, there's a 75% of the time what you think is what's going to happen. 25% of the time, you're going to have to consult with the state and say, what should I do
Again,
here?
what you pulled in here, you pulled in means of egress, that happens to be exterior, which again is covered by that whole provision, plus fire escapes. Because fire escapes is the downgrade of a code mandated means of egress, a full-blown compliant means of egress, is allowing it to go down to 22, reducing the width for a specific reason. That's a fire escape. It happens to be an exterior means of egress otherwise.
I also use the rule of thumb. If I can bring a fridge and a couch in, it's a means of egress.
Yeah.
If I'm only gonna use it to get out of the building and no other time I'm gonna use it, it's gonna be a fire escape. So now it becomes, so if it's a condo, guess what they want? They want 2 means of egress, and they want you to bring in fridges and couches on both sides. Guess what? You're gonna be putting in a massive set of stairs. You know, egress stairs. If it's, no, I just wanna activate, you know, I want a fire escape out of that, you know, attic room up there, I feel uncomfortable. My second floor tenant uses the 3rd floor and I'm using it, okay, we'll allow a fire escape. Window or a door. Again, another gray area saying most of the time the law says put in a door to the fire escape, even though it's a fire escape. But a lot of times, depending on the individual city, they'll say, okay, I'm okay with, because it's an egress fire escape. It's not a yeah, it's not ingress and egress. Those good questions. But as you know, the rule is 75-25. Most of the time, this is pretty simple stuff. 25% of the time, you're gonna get some crazy unicorn questions that just, you know, you're gonna have to have an answer for. Any other questions so regarding steel, regarding welding, regarding the norm?
Doesn't have to be steel, depending on the construction type.
That's another great question. So must match the building type. So the norm is that all fire escapes must be made of metal or non-combustible material. So I've had certain situations where they've allowed pressure-treated fire. It's not fire rate. It's really the thickness. It's not that you can't buy.
Too much nominal lumber.
Yeah, that's so the fire rating is in the thickness. So everything. So you can't put in 5/4 decking. You have to use 1.5 inch. So everything is like this. Everything is just a beefy fire escape. So yes, and again, all exterior steel or wooden stairs, balconies, bridges. Shall be examined every 5 years, which means you got a lot of motels, you got a lot of these Juliet balconies, Romeo and Juliet balconies that are supposed to be inspected. All these beautiful, you know, 55 and older retirement homes that have these little 12-inch balconies that the sliding door and everybody's always leaning on there. We have to inspect 50 of those because those are fire escapes. Those are they're balcony. They're areas of refuge, they're balconies. They're supposed to be, you're supposed to save somebody from there. They get out, take a breath while the firemen come up with their ladders and pull them off the building.
Or even if they're not, they do what you just described.
Yeah,
They just
well,
decided to look out the thing and fell off. Why? Because it failed.
And that's just how, I'll show you the video of that just happened in Boston. Okay, so I'll give a little bit of a story about what happened there, but go ahead, question?
A lot of the old flat roof factories will have the hoop ladders coming off the side. Would you
Yeah.
consider those fire escapes?
So, to the roof, all right, so the loop ladders on the top are not for the vendors. You're supposed to have another means of egress onto the roof, those are for firemen. And a lot of times, the loop ladders going up above, some of them, OSHA requires that you have a hoop around it, but then these guys with their tanks, they can't get up.
Should those be inspected every 5 years?
No, they're all part of the system. A fire escape system is inspected from the roof all the way down to the ground. And actually, not just to the ground, to an area of public way. You know what I'm saying? So if you're locked in a garden somewhere, you gotta make that part of your report. I'm locked in a garden. So what do we have? We have 25 questions. What don't you have in Massachusetts? But they have, a couple of cities have taken this course and actually implemented a questionnaire. It's an industry standard questionnaire. Lowell did it, Everett, so give them a call, see what they're doing. But look over here on the questionnaire. A questionnaire is a guide that every architect and engineer should look at, right? And what it is, it asks you simple structural questions, and if they answer these 25 questions, pretty much you know that the fire escape was properly examined. And the key questions throughout this examination is always interior rust, not surface rust. Guys, this is surface rust. This will never kill anybody. It can poison you because of volatile lead paint, but it'll never kill you. But the structural connection in here, right? This structural connection that I can put my fingers through, that'll kill firemen. Because very rare does it kill a building inspector because you guys don't get on these fire escapes. Kill tenants. And that's why these guys are taught, in case of fire, don't use these things because this is what they have out there. This is how much rust is sitting in there. Look, and the head is still here. I can't even get it off with my finger. But look at look, it's gone. So why do we bring Rusty out? We bring Rusty out to prove that if you leave it alone for 100 years, and it's not that one the building inspectors did a crappy job, or the fire department did a crappy job. It's not. It's 100 years that there wasn't a 5-year rule of reinspection. So if there's no required routine proof, like there is now, but it took 100 years for it to land on the IFC nationwide, and in some states, there's about, when I teach this class, I primarily teach this class on fire prevention, in 40 out of 50 states. And I've taught from Maine to Florida, Chicago to Texas, and Seattle to San Diego. And this room is filled with fire prevention. In 10 out of those 50 states, it's building departments. So I've been teaching, he said, you look familiar, but I've taught this to Samboa, I've taught this to NBCIA, I've taught it to Metro West, I've taught it to, there's somebody way up by Amherst.
Yeah, we have.
You want to go to Boom?
Yeah, I taught it